Hello and welcome to Series 5 of Autism in Conversation with Auticon, a podcast from Auticon, the largest autistic majority company in the world. The podcast aims to help raise greater understanding and appreciation of neurodiversity through fascinating conversations with fantastic guests. Hosted by me, Carrie Grant, MBE, each episode will feature inspirational guests from all walks of life who each share a passion for making the world more inclusive. We'll be talking about the many benefits of hiring neurodivergent talent, through to some of the more common challenges faced by autistic adults, navigating the workplace, plus so much more. All of my 4 children are neurodivergent, and in January 2023, I received my own autism diagnosis as well. So this is a subject I'm incredibly passionate about. I'm really looking forward to facilitating some great conversations about autism and all things neurodiversity. Hopefully, we can all learn something new along the way and maybe even be inspired to do something new or different ourselves. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to today's latest episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. This is a special one for me, as we'll be talking about why parents of neurodivergent children can be trailblazers for the future. As a parent of 4 neurodivergent children and a late diagnosed autistic person myself, this is a topic I understand very well firsthand. Having said that, I know that whilst there are often many commonalities and shared experiences amongst parents of neurodivergent children, I also know that every single family is different and we all go about things in our own unique ways. So there'll no doubt be much to discuss and learn from each other today. Every day is a school day, as they say. Now, when it comes to learning, I'm sure any parent of a neurodivergent child will tell you that there's a lot of learning, and I'd argue a lot of unlearning too. Many of the standard parenting guidelines simply don't work when it comes to neurodivergent children, leaving many of us to wonder, what next? Where do I go from here? Then there's the often fought battle when it comes to getting the right support for your child. Many of us become warriors, yes, oh yes, that we never thought we could be. So what can we take from this when it comes to the working world? Here to join me in discussing these issues are David Grant, MBE, vocal coach, campaigner, father of 4 neurodivergent children. Wow, yeah, so much similarity to my life. That's because
I know, lovely to meet you, Carrie.
We're upstairs, downstairs today, aren't we?
I would say I've wanted to meet you for such a long time, but you've already given it away that we're in the same house.
Okay, next up is podcaster, social media influencer and parent of 4 as well, Caro Tasker. Hello, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. This is a joy.
This is such a brilliant panel. And finally, Heidi Mavir, parent, author, advocate and activist. Welcome.
Thank you. I've only got 1 child. I feel like I'm letting the slide down a bit here.
So far.
Well, let's see. That ship has definitely sailed.
Yes. I think there's probably a lot of envy coming from the other 3 of us. She's only got 1 child.
Oh, he's a 4-in-1. Don't worry. He makes up for it.
Yeah. Right, absolutely. So first of all, I would love for the listeners to get some insight from each of you about your own personal connections. We've given a little bit about that with how many children you've got, but we've got some commonality between us all, but some interesting differences. So Heidi, let's turn first to you. Can you tell us about your son and how his diagnosis came about?
Yeah. So my son Theo is 19 now. But when he was 15, he pretty spectacularly crashed out of school unexpectedly. And at the time, we didn't know he was neurodivergent. We also didn't know that I was neurodivergent. So a lot has changed in 4 years. And we went from being a household where we thought we knew everything about ourselves and our places in the world to having to rethink all of that. He had almost 2.5 years out of school, had to fight hard for education otherwise than at school, an EHCP package for him. He was very unwell. I was very unwell. It was a massive, massive shift for us. And during that process, it became clear that we were both autistic ADHD. We both went on to have formal diagnoses of that. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell. He's 19 now and he's incredible, but a lot has changed for us in 4 years.
And I was going to say, all of that's happened in 4 years. When I think back to our first diagnosis, which, David will talk about back in the day, I'm thinking we had years and years to get used to each individual little bit of each person. I cannot imagine what you have had to face in such a tiny space of time.
It was definitely a baptism of fire. And like it kind of, for lots of children like Theo have barriers to attendance and who hit kind of like crisis and experience burnout and emotional based school avoidance, it can come very suddenly from apparently nowhere. As what we know now was that it wasn't from nowhere. We just didn't know what to look for to see that coming. But he hit crisis and went from being able to be in school pretty much full time to not attending at all within about 8 weeks. So it was a pretty steep learning curve for us all.
Gosh, I can only imagine. But actually, sadly, a common experience
Very
for
common.
so many parents. And, you know, I know there are probably parents listening in thinking, oh, that hasn't happened to my child. And you don't want to kind of go, well, it could, because you don't want to scare people, but it can happen. You do need to know what to look for. And we'll get into that perhaps a little bit later. Let's go to Caro. And could you tell me about your family and how the diagnosis came about?
So, my daughter sits between two boys, and I knew differently to Heidi, I knew pretty early on that she was different. She presented differently. There were certain things that, and I appreciate you don't compare one child to the other, but I knew there was something different about her. And it wasn't about what was wrong with her. It was about, really, right from the onset, actually, it was about getting the right diagnosis and getting the right support for her. And my daughter is nearly 18, and I knew she was different from the age of about 2. And the amount of people we went to see just kept stacking up and up and up and up. It sort of just was a list in the end. And I got, at least on 3 of those reports, I got mother worried, lots of, concerned mum. And I felt a little bit like I was being sort of batted off. But it turns out that my daughter is autistic. Initially, her diagnosis was auditory processing disorder, which is a very easy one. Everyone's nodding going, yeah, we've all had that. Because it is like this initial...
It's the gateway drug.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit like, before the beat drops. It's like that. You're about to, yeah, that's the one. We get that. That.
Yep, got it.
So we've all had that one. And then she was diagnosed autistic at the age of around 7, and with ADHD as well thrown in for good measure. And then when she was 9 years old, we got a PDA diagnosis, pathological demand avoidance. And interestingly enough,
what does that mean?
So pathological demand avoidance is a nervous system disability. So essentially her perception of the world and her perception of demand is very, very different to our own. Not just different, her nervous system sends her all the wrong messages. So for example, like anyone on an autistic spectrum, you will get different levels of this. So for some children, a very regular demand, like, can you get in the car, would be like the equivalent of being asked to sit in a pit of snakes. Go sit in that pit of snakes, because it's a demand, they can't cope with it. For some children, the rising of the sun coming through their windows is just too much for them for their it's a nervous disability, it's a nervous system disability to completely understand. The way I view it now, having lived with it for a very long time, is for her, it's really an expectation problem. So when we used to talk about pathological demand avoidance, I would get a lot of you get a lot of head bobs anyway, don't we? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, I'm dying, Jesus, So and especially from specialists and those that have worked in this profession a very long time. And I think it's spectacularly unhelpful, because I think for a lot of children, much like my daughter, it is an expectation issue. And it's what she is terrified of getting anything wrong. So we got very, very used to the way we spoke to her, I did, and the way I spoke to all of my children actually really benefited them. So for example, the whole getting in the car thing, instead of going get in the car, I'd say, which side of the car do you want to sit? So we I call it bypassing the problem, bypassing the issue. Just go to the next question. And I've used that quite a lot. Anyway, that, and we are nearly 18 now. We are nearly 18, sounds really regal. And we're just coming to the end of our sort of regular education. And when I say regular, she came out of the mainstream when she was 11. We had nearly a year out of school. and she went into specialist provision from the age of 12. So really the next step for her is, it's all a bit, it's just a complete nightmare at the moment, but nothing that I've not dealt with before. And I'm pretty well versed in this area. So yeah, I mean, we've lived and breathed it for a very long time as a group, but it's still not without its challenges, but she is exceptional. She is the best of us. She's the best
PDA
of me.
kids are my very favourite kind of kids.
She is an absolute rock star. I just love her so much. I could eat her every morning.
I love that
she's
PDA
amazing.
They'll say the things that you're thinking that no one else will say.
It's extraordinary.
Right?
She would have you peeing your pantaloons. She is absolutely hilarious. Some of the things she comes out with, honestly, she's brilliant. She is truly the greatest thing in my life. I mean, all of my kids are. She's brilliant. Yeah. So she's taught me, I think, more about anything and anything could ever teach me ever. She's exceptional.
I love that. I can feel the energy of appreciation of what you just said. I think we're all like, yep, we live with one of those, and yep, we've been through what you're saying. David, let's turn to you now. We have talked to you before on this podcast about the kids, but there might be people that haven't heard your story and the various different diagnoses that unfolded in our family. So give us the backdrop.
Oh my goodness! If I was going to go through all of it and how we arrived at all the different diagnoses and the different disses, as I call them, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysmorphia, dysphoria, we would be here for a very long time. But suffice it to say, we have 4 children. The middle 2 were the first 2 that were diagnosed as autistic, and that happened when they were 7 and 3. And what was amazing is that we observed our 3-year-old and went, something very, very different about this one compared to the other 2. So we thought, let's get a specialist. And so someone came round who was a friend of yours, someone that you had met. He was absolutely brilliant. And as I dropped them off at the train station, they said something to me, having seen both the middle 2 children, that came as a surprise, and said, yeah, I'm absolutely certain you need a diagnosis. Absolutely certain your younger one, Arlo, is autistic. But the one that I would be most concerned about is Thailand. I was like, what? I learned in that instant, that there is a saying that we're all familiar with, which is if you met one autistic person, you met one autistic person. That actually there is a danger that I think so many parents encounter in thinking these are the characteristics of autism. People kind of have a checklist, and if somebody doesn't tick those boxes, they can't be autistic. And the reality is that it presents in so many different ways with so many different people that, I see people now, we see people and we look at one another and go, yeah, they're definitely on the spectrum. I'm sure all of us do on this podcast, but maybe prior to knowing what to look for, we wouldn't even have noticed. It's not what you look at, it's what you see. And so once we discovered that both of our middle children were on the spectrum, it started a journey that every parent of children on the spectrum go through. Every parent of it's not a journey of discovery. I think it's a journey of rediscovery, because I think certainly for me, it's made me realize time and time again how many attributes and characteristics I took for granted. And so as a result of taking certain things for granted, I didn't really see what was there. I assumed what was there. And actually, the voyage of discovery for me has been learning who my children are and how to parent them in the light of who they are. Because I do know about you. I know what you're like. You're really clever. You actually.
That's me,
sussed
by the
this
way,
out.
he's talking about.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, no, all three of you.
You need to be clearer. We're autistic.
No.
We need clear
Heidi
definitions.
and Tara, I've heard you speak. You're all really clever. It took me a while to realize that our children would need me to, because they were different, would need me to parent them differently. And I think that's something about autism parents that I've discovered and recognized through getting to know a number of them, that each of us, if we're going to navigate these waters and come out with children who have a high self-regard, we have to parent each child as they need to be parented. There's absolutely no one size fits all. And so anyway, here we are. We discovered we were autism parents, Carrie and I, and Carrie went, bang, I'm in on it. And I went, I'm going to solve this problem. And there began my journey.
Interesting.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that in a moment. Heidi, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that thing about when you're talking about, just listening to you both speak about, I knew my child was different to the others. I'm like, as a parent of one child, I never had that luxury.
Of course,
Yes, of course.
And I do often wonder whether that's part of the reason why he wasn't recognised as neurodivergent until he was well into his teens. But also, I think for me, and I think for maybe some of you as well, that realisation that all of these things that are sort of quirks or unusual ways of being that we see in our children, that we don't identify as indicators that they might be neurodivergent, because apples don't fall very far from trees. Yeah. So we're like, well, I'm just like that, and I'm not whatever it is that we're thinking about.
Right.
And I think we have literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of parents of neurodivergent kids who are perhaps early in that realization and starting to have conversations about maybe your child is differently wired. And I wish we had something that plugged that gap for parents so that we could sidle up to them and say, by the way, just in case you're wondering, if you've got a neurodivergent kid, at least one of the parents is most likely neurodivergent.
Yeah.
I'll leave that with you.
It's not come from the ether.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
But the thing that I felt just listening to all of you speak actually is that you've all got a starting point, right? Where we don't know, perhaps, in fact, in all the cases that we've just heard there, we didn't know about neurodivergence in any major way before our children. I don't want to get in, and this isn't about school bashing, but Heidi, why was he 15 before they even spotted stuff? Why did he have to have a crisis? Like, all right, it's understandable that you wouldn't know. You're parent to one child. But if you're talking about children going through multiple years at school with multiple teachers, multiple different experiences, did no one notice?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no is the quick answer. People said things like, oh, this is a bit behind on this. I think professionals are frightened to use the word autistic. I think that teachers, educators don't want to say, we think your child might be different. Parents don't want to hear it. I think ultimately we've got an issue with a huge amount of stereotyping and ableism in our systems that means that the last thing we want to do is consider our kids might be disabled. We think that disability is a dirty word. I don't think it is. But I think the bigger picture in there is that we have educators who are, our teachers who are spending the most time with our kids, for example. They've got 30 plus children in a classroom. It's basically herding cats. That's their job. And they don't have the information they need to be able to identify when children might be struggling. They don't know what to look for. Newly qualified teachers have half a day's training on SEND currently. And we have this setup whereby, because we don't know what to look for and because we know that children, kind of manage and find ways to make things work, we have to wait until a child hits crisis or until they're inconvenient before we identify that they might need support. We don't know what healthy autistic kids look like because we don't have those conversations.
Ooh, that's deep. We don't know what healthy autistic kids look like. That's huge. And yet I would say this, and this does come down to training, that in all, we have a few friends who are TAs in schools. They're amazing, lovely people. And in all our kids' parties, we always had to invite the entire class to each child's party, just so that we hoped that we could construct a few friendships from those parties, as you do. But me and my two TA friends, would look at 30 kids and we could tell you just from a 2-hour party which children were neurodivergent out of those 30 kids. So if it's that easy to spot in 2 hours with the knowledge that we had as parents, and this is TAs as well, so they're not necessarily neurodivergent. I might have that special gift because I'm neurodivergent, but they weren't. They're looking and they're just going, "Oop, yeah, that one. Oop, yeah, that one." And you see it in 2 hours. So how is this stuff not being brought up?
Question is, though, why do you know that? You know that because you needed to know that because your children needed support. Teachers, TAs, educators, they don't need that information until it becomes difficult for them to do what they need to do.
And you throw into that mix societal view. So you have this societal view. Ooh, I still get head bobbed. Is your daughter at school with your boys? Oh no, she's autistic. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry." I'm like, "Don't be sorry. Why are you sorry? Why are you sorry about that? How do you think that thing that you've got on your phone, do you honestly think that thing in your pocket was created by a neurotypical human being? Seriously, are you telling me that you think Silicon Valley is full of neurotypical people? If you think about, my boy, we are in an inordinately privileged position. And we were able to fee pay for our kids to go to school. And I appreciate that's our choice. And it's a hugely privileged position. And I would say my children have been to both local schools and schools that we paid for. And there is in my humble opinion, a marked difference in my county, because I would say that those in local level and local schools, are less judgmental in general. That's a generalized statement, and it's not the same for all schools. It isn't. But I could tell you, growing up, the different school, my kids all went to different schools, and there were some people, again, I'm with you on this. You could sit in a party with 30 kids, and I used to invite absolutely everyone. Just maybe 1 or 2 friendships might work, or I would have to manipulate that or help that. That was just my life with them growing up. And I would be like, God, in fact, I have a good friend whose 2 out of her children are diagnosed autistic now. And I could have told her that years ago, but do you want to hear it from another parent? By the way, I think, she'd have got cross with me. How? Oh, that would have been an insult. Do you see what I mean? And this is the problem we have. So it's not only the teachers are overworked, and you are at your analogy, Heidi, is absolutely bang on. They're firefighting a lot of the time. They are literally, they have over 30 children in a lot of classes, no learning support assistants, no TAs, 1 teacher with half a day's training in a specialist, in SEND. And I just, we are absolutely at breaking point. And even, and then add on to that, by the way, I think your child's autistic. Well, that's very rude. Why is it rude? I'm helping you. This diagnosis will help you. It will help your family. It will help that human that you're raising.
Have you got to the place yet where you feel confident saying to other parents, just so that you know your kid might be autistic?
No.
Because I am in that place now.
I think we
have
are.
to stop myself sometimes.
Sure.
Are you?
Because I'm like, is this person ready for this information? The reason I'm in that place is because someone gifted that to me. And that's how I realised he was autistic.
Yes.
And without that information from another parent of an autistic kid, where she actually said to me, when did you realise he was autistic? And I said, he's not autistic.
You said when I was today years old.
Yeah. And she said, I'm sorry. I assumed he was. I'm really sorry. And then I was like, okay, well, that's information.
Yeah.
And so that's what, but I do think as parents of autistic kids, we're even frightened of saying it because of the response we might get.
Yeah, I find that, but I think I started saying it to people almost immediately. I started to realise there are other people around who've definitely got the same kind of kids as I've got. And I would say it in that way. I'd say, by the way, because I would notice they're the kids that are being held back in the class. They're the ones that the teachers are always talking to at the end of the day. That's the child that goes into school crying and all those same kind of things that we had encountered. So I'd be like, just in case you ever want to chat, I feel like I'm here for it. Your child might be similar to my child. Just mentioning it, and that I would leave it there. They sometimes would give me a rude look. But I would say 100% of those people, and I've probably said that to about 30 people in schools, have all come back to me and
That's why
all
nobody
said,
speaks to her, Cara.
yeah, I've got no friends. No, one by one, and some of them 10 years later said, I'm ready to hear what you said that day because I couldn't listen then, but you're right. And now my child's in crisis. Now I need to hear what you've got to say. And I think it is worth saying. Sorry, David, you're the interviewee and I'm not. Go on.
No, you're right. The part of the reason why I can understand your reticence, Caro, is because we haven't moved yet in society the narrative on from label to description or explanation. Right. If I said to you, or I said to somebody, Caro is blonde, you wouldn't be insulted, you wouldn't be complimented. It would simply be a description. And it's observational. And I think that we need to move the narrative on societally to a point where when you say your child is autistic, what you're actually saying is, I am explaining to you the differences that you're observing. I'm not saying I'm not saying that it's not an insult. It's not an offense. It's not something to worry you. It's not a negative. It's a description. It is raining is not offensive. It's a description of what's happening in the world outside. This person is autistic is not offensive. It's a description of what's happening in their interior world.
Yeah. You know, when Caro said about, well, first of all, we had an auditory processing disorder diagnosis. Before we got an autism diagnosis for Theo, we had sensory processing disorder, auditory processing disorder, tic disorder. We had so many disorders on a list.
Don't say it. Don't
Social communication disorder. It was like, would it not just be easier to just say he's autistic and give us one word that covers all those bases?
Yeah, right.
But the reluctance around that, and I talk about this in my book. I say, I know there is a movement within the disability space that, we shouldn't label our children. And I'm a completely the opposite opinion. I do believe that diagnosis is a privilege, and I recognise that. But also, for me, labels, like labels on clothes, they're care instructions.
Yes.
If you have a mohair jumper and it's a mohair jumper, you don't put it on a 90-degree wash. If you have an autistic kid, you don't expect them to go into a classroom of 30 kids and just be able to get on with it. I think it's so important that we have those conversations that, a label, like David said, it's a description, it's a care instruction. It gives you a shortcut to knowing what that child might need.
Heidi, you've just mentioned your book there. Just give it a plug. What's it called?
I mention I wrote a book?
Did I mention your book? Yeah.
I wrote a book. It's called, look at that lovely segue. It's called Your Child is Not Broken, Parent Your Neurodivergent Child Without Losing Your Marbles. And it's a kind of a retelling of our... Have you read my book?
I think I might have done. And I read everything.
Don't you just love these podcasts? Okay, so actually you've mentioned parenting there. Let's move on because we've talked a little bit about school. And of course, that's a massive part of our parenting experience. Let's look at what happens in our parenting as we move forward, growing these beautiful neurodivergent children. Caro, I saw something brilliant that you wrote on Instagram about how days can be split into bankers, where things go well, and learners, where things don't go so well. And that really resonated with us. So what have been some of the biggest learning experience that you've had as a result of having an autistic child?
Okay, so, obviously every day is a school day with any kid, but, quadruple that for a neurodivergent child. And my whole, to say, going back to the bankers and learners thing, I just think that it's a psychologist in me that goes, if we say it was a terrible day, I had a terrible day with her, automatically that brings up negativity. What's happened is you're learning from the behavior that your child is presenting to you. That is a message. They are communicating and it's not great, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It means just for now, don't do it. So for me, the biggest learners from her learner days, and actually, I don't want to say too much because I'm touching all sorts of wood. We're on a bit of we're all right at the moment. We're okay, but certainly raising her when she was young, the biggest learners, I think I was a little bit blind to at first, and I realised actually it wasn't about being told by a lot of people you pander too much to her. I'm like, actually, what I'm doing is helping my whole group, my family to function, and without all of them functioning, none of us function. So the greatest learner, I would say, is really do what you need to do. You know your kid best, and you carry on with that. And another great thing that I always try and remember is you might get something that works very well. For example, which side of the car do you want to sit to get them in the car? Or you want to sit on that seat every day while I help you do your shoes. That's absolutely fine. There might be a time where that runs out. There might be a time where that method of getting out the house or getting them to do whatever it is that you need to do to facilitate the next thing, don't get rid of it. Just shelve it. Always shelve things that worked, because they might come back into play.
Yes.
And I always say, don't, when you think you've got those banker days, you're like, this is winning. Every day I'm winning. Everything's working. All these brilliant things. We are superheroes. And then all
Parent
of a sudden
of
you're
the
not.
Year award.
Yeah, that's me. That's us. And then
I'm sorry. I've so often presented myself with the Parent of the Year award in the morning and taken it away in the afternoon.
Oh, overshot the mark.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got to keep it on the lowdown. And even now, we have those days. I'm like, even when I explain, even now when I say it's going really well, but it might go wrong today or tomorrow or in a minute, because we're all so paranoid that it might. Even those banker days, that method, that whatever's your tick box exercises that have worked for your child, don't think that they suddenly, if they stop working, might not work again. Just shelve that routine, shelve where you sat to do their shoes, shelve the food that they loved for a week and now absolutely hate. They don't hate it, they just don't like it that day. And I think we are so hard on ourselves, because you're like, I thought I'd fixed that part and we're winning and it's all brilliant. You're still winning. It's still okay. You're just learning. We're learning that.
I think there's definitely something about destination parenting or destination living. I think too many of us live with a sense of Disney. It's got every day, it's got to have the happy ending, the Disney ending. It's all wonderful. And my child will be healed. And my child will work, it's all fixed. And actually there is something beautiful about living in a healing body. I don't need to be healed. I'm living in a healing body. And when you are parenting, you are living in it with a child they don't need to be fixed. That's what you're saying, isn't it? It's just actually each day brings its own blessings and challenges and things that are great and things that are damn awful. And actually it's all moving forward. And actually there isn't like, I think sometimes we just imagine, and up ahead, there's a gate and I get out the gate and then we're free. It's actually, no, the process in the middle is the bit that's just so incredible. And if we can teach ourselves to enjoy that bit, there is something in that really allows parenting to be way more enjoyable when we're in those exhausted times.
And it is exhausting. You're absolutely bang on. It is exhausting. And I think that those negatives are maybe pushed a little bit too much. But by the way, I push them too much as well. We're all guilty of that. And I have this great saying, actually. It's not my saying, it's Hemingway's saying. But he said that we are all broken. It's the cracks that let the light in. And I love that. I don't strive for perfection ever. And I never use the expression, I just want my kids to be happy. No one is happy all the time. I like the nice, boring middle ground. And then you get the highs, and with the highs come the lows, and then the nice, boring middle ground. Lovely. Give me middle ground any day of the week.
And we do our young people and our other neurodivergent people a disservice in that quest for happiness, because what happiness is being regulated and, not being in the big feels. And neurodivergent people live in the big feels. It has to be okay for us to experience that full spectrum of human emotion. And the extremes of that as neurodivergent people, we probably experience more extremely than neurotypical people. Yes. I don't know. I'm not sure. I've never been neurotypical. I'm sure it's very weird as an experience. Yeah. But what's
that like?
Yeah, who knows?
I don't know. They have to wait for a long time to get their diagnosis, though. Listen, mate, when there's a diagnosis for neurotypicals, I'm going to make them wait 20 years minimum. I'm going to boss it.
And then on the day they're due, we're not going to turn up. We're not going to turn up.
No, we're not turning up and all the reports will be late. Anyways.
There'll be a small talk exam, I'm guessing, at some point.
Yes.
Be rated on.
Oh my God.
And
Eye
they'll have to
contact and
take us
small
to a
talk.
tribunal. They'll have to take us to a tribunal.
Please, Auticon, can we do a reverse autism episode where we just say all the things we would like to do if we were neurotypical? Do 2 neurotypicals. Anyway, moving back to Heidi and the sensible answer that you're going to give me on parenting. You know, what would you say is like something that you've learned that you thought, wow, I wish I'd have seen that before. That's a big learning thing. That really works for us.
Oh my goodness. Do you know, I really resonate with the whole thing that you're saying about things being a journey, not a destination. And I think as a late identified neurodivergent adult of a late identified neurodivergent child, the thing that has been the big learning for me and that I try and kind of instill with the parents that I'm working with is, look, if you're only firing on one cylinder, that's okay. And you are allowed to show up and take up space and be heard and have your rights kind of met, and you do not have to be perfect, and nor does your child. And the important thing for me throughout this journey, and the biggest learning for me, and I wish I'd clocked it sooner, was when I found out that he was autistic, it felt like everything changed in a moment. It felt like I had to do all this unpicking of all these stereotypes and what I thought me being autistic meant. And it did a real disservice to me and to him and our relationship. And I kind of came round full circle and had that moment where I was like, someone said to me, you know, you've got new information. You haven't got a new child. Yes. Your child hasn't changed.
Yes. Same experience.
Right. And I think that's a really common experience for lots of parents who have a diagnosis thrown at them or thrown at them. Let's be honest, who have to fight hard for a diagnosis. Yeah. And one of the things that we've learned during this is, look, I'm getting this wrong more than I'm getting it right, probably. But I prioritize our relationship and his well-being and my mental health, and everything else comes second. And that we'll see ourselves all right with that. Do you know what I mean? So it's about being intentional in those priorities. There's nothing more valuable and more precious than your relationship with your child, and that has to come first. So I think that's been the biggest learning for us.
I love that. Thank you so much. David, let's turn to you. Your parenting journey. Tell us a little bit about what you feel you've learned along the way.
Gosh, I've learned how much I didn't know when we started, to be honest. You know, I sometimes make a joke about the fact that I knew 3 cast iron facts about parenting, and they were all wrong. That basically, I think the thing that I've learned is that I thought in some ways I could create an environment for children that I didn't have. That thing of, here's what I wanted. I grew up with a single parent. My children were going to grow up with 2 parents who love each other. I grew up without, very poor. My children weren't going to have to go without. I grew up feeling, because of, you know, I suppose the racial and social environment of the 60s and 70s in which I grew up, as though I had to fight for equality. My children weren't going to have to fight for equality. Little did I know that they were going to have an entirely different fight for equality, that they were going to have an entirely different fight to actually be able to take a stance in community as people of value, of worth, as assets rather than liabilities. And I think that awareness that I couldn't change that, I couldn't make the life of my children the way that I wanted to make it, because the way that I wanted to make it was a life for children that didn't exist. They only existed in my head. They were my hypothetical children. This is what it's going to be like when I become a parent, you know, in fantasy land. You talked about Disney. In Disney, I was the parent who I'd come home and my kids would sit around me and it'd be like, oh yeah, that's great. And I'd look at them and say, and how have you been today? And they'd answer me in French. You know, and we'd sit in a restaurant and they'd be perfectly behaved and they'd order in Japanese, and I'd be able to say, he's only 7. You know, but I learned that actual parenting is an entirely different thing to hypothetical parenting, I also learned that parenting children who are neurodivergent requires you to come off the beaten track, to come off the typical, whatever neurotypical parenting is, you have to abandon it. We have 4 children. I feel like I parent in 4 different ways. I just really made a note of what Cara said about if something works and then stops working. Don't abandon it forever. Just recognize it's not working. And what I learned was it took me a long, long time to accept that it wasn't working. Because
and what impact did that have on you? Like if you weren't able to see, well, you could see that it wasn't working. So what did you do?
I doubled down. I just thought I will
make it work.
I will make this stuff work. I'm going to go harder at the stuff that isn't working. It's not working because I'm not being strong enough in my application of these strategies that don't work.
We're going to rank up the use of the naughty step.
Oh, absolutely.
Have you tried just speaking more firmly?
And the flinty look. And what I call the octave drop, where I go, children, no response. Children, no response. Here comes the octave drop. Children. And Carrie would say, you're terrifying them with that. And I said, well, isn't it working? No, they're terrified. And the reason why I think I was tied to what wasn't working is because I didn't realize that I was neurodivergent myself. And as a result, I had constructed in my own mind a sort of a fantasy of what normal parenting was. And if you tore me away from the fantasy, I had nothing. If you tore me away from the fantasy, it was all improvisation.
Did you also worry about what other people might think? Because parents are really judged, aren't they?
Oh, listen, the judgment on parents is absolutely savage. And yes, I was worried about what other people might think. It wasn't until I began to understand the kids that I realized that I had grown up in a society, not just a community, because this goes across all communities, where when you are a parent, your children are supposed to somehow inform others of the quality of your parenting by their behavior. And we all buy into that. And if they're not behaving in a way that's informing other people that your parenting is immaculate, just look at those well-behaved children, then yes, you are self-conscious. What does it say about me? Actually, it took me a long time to get myself out of the equation and to recognize that raising these kids was going to be about the kids. And I can say this, I think, is as anathema to some people, but my children have become the parents of their father, because the father I am, I wouldn't be if I didn't have the children that we have.
Can I also talk just while we've got you, David? And I think I don't want to over-gender this, because I think it can happen with any of us as parents or carers, however we come to that parenting experience. But just that need to fix things or kind of, I need to be the person who can get in there and solve the problem. Because I know that for you, that was quite an issue, wasn't it?
Oh, it's a big deal. I'm the guy that counts. How far are we through this? How far are we on this journey? We're 20%, we're 40%, we're 60%, we're 80%. How much longer do we have to go on this project? It's a 6-week project. We're 3.5 weeks in. Right, we're more than halfway. We've broken the back of it. Yay. When somebody says...
say, Caro, Heidi and I are silently judging you right now.
Yeah.
You're a stat guy. You're a stat guy.
Yeah.
Stat.
Yeah.
Just silently diagnosing you.
Yeah, I'm that guy.
I live with one of those.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I silently judge every single person I ever have any kind of interaction with. So
Carry
I'm
on,
very
David,
good at
sorry.
pretending I don't. But
As you were, David, as you were.
Heidi, that's cool. That means that you and I are very similar.
yeah, everyone does it. We're just honest about it.
Everyone does that.
Yeah.
Everyone does that.
I'm not judgmental. I judge and I'm mental, but I'm not judgmental.
So, David, you got your stats going and you had
So-
your little grid.
And that, in a way, I think made it really difficult to come away from, okay, so now I recognize that there's a difference. But until I recognized it as a difference, I recognized it as, I classified it as potentially a problem to be solved. You know, and because I was so tied to the fantasy of how I was going to be judged by my children, how they were going to encounter and navigate the world being different, my initial drive was to try and make their differences unrecognizable as possible. So I'd know about it, but they'd get on in the world, it'd be fine. Because there is nothing more. I remember one of the most painful days of my life was seeing one of our children standing in line at school with a parent handing out party invitations in primary school, going down the line, handing an invitation to every child in the class, getting to our kid, walking past her and handing an invitation to the child behind. And watching that and thinking, I want to scream at her, but actually our child hasn't noticed, so I don't want to draw attention to it. If
You
the
want to
only
scream
way,
at the world.
What kind of a human adult being allows that to happen?
And why is it
Anyone listening
common?
to this podcast or anything in the world, either invite 5 people and go to the movies or do what you need to do, or if it is a large percentage of the class, it's everyone or a teeny tiny group that you can fit into the palm of your hand or pocket.
Yeah.
What kind
Basic
of an
rules.
adult genuinely
invites everyone but one.
Common decency. That's just manners.
It's that thing. It's that forever problem, though, isn't it? Like we know, that's a really clear example of what autistic people experience on the daily.
Yes.
Like just because it was in that moment, it was obvious and you could see it. We have that experience day in, day out, excluded from things, missed out from things, not invited to things, not told about things, assumed we won't be able to take part in things. Now, I get invited to things all the time and I don't go, but I'd like to have that choice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Or I say I'm going to go and then don't go, which happens quite often. Or I arrive late and leave early. But I would like that to be my choice, not just to be you assuming that, I don't know, that my autism is going to rub off on you or something. Let's be honest, if it did, it would probably do you a favour. But, I'm feeling very...
You would be a better person for it.
David, in that moment, how did you hold it together? I mean, my daughter's not been invited to a lot of parties, but it's never been
that obvious.
Overt. I held it together because I noticed that our child hadn't noticed. Because they were looking and chatting to a friend, and I just thought, I don't want them to realise they're the only child in this line who hasn't been invited, to have to spend the whole day away from us in school, because this was at the beginning of the day, feeling totally excluded. So I said nothing because I didn't want them to know. But what it did to me is, there's a saying, isn't there, in the Serenity Prayer, help me to accept the things I can't change. It made me think it's time for us to change the things we can't accept. Because that's unacceptable.
It's unacceptable. Standard.
Okay, because there's so much stuff that I want to talk to each of you about. Heidi, let me come back to you because I do want to ask you, and to be honest, I'm so shocked that you've only been in this field, as it were, for 4 years.
I'm a very quick learner.
Yeah, well, and clearly, and it's probably become your intense interest, right? But just your understanding of the whole EHCP system. This is an area that I know you're doing. You're about to do a 6-week course as we're recording this podcast now. You've got your book out, which is, Your Child Is Not Broken. So we've got that bit. Talk to us. Could you give us just an outline of, just in terms for parents listening that are thinking, I've got to navigate. Do I ask for any? Do I insist for any HCP? Do I ask for one? Is it worth getting one? What difference does it make? How do I've just been refused one. Could you give us some little pointers on the HCP stuff?
My goodness. Okay. Well, there's a reason it's a long course. There's quite a lot to cover. But I think one of the things that I want parents and carers to know. So an EHCP isn't a golden ticket by any stretch of the imagination.
And we thank the Guardian for that.
And it's
I like that paper. But...
Right. I mean, well, let's not talk about the Guardian, but or any other newspaper for that matter. # not all newspapers. But I naively, like lots of parents, thought that when my child was identified as needing support, that I would speak to someone, probably the Senko, and they would go, yeah, no problem. And then all these things would happen. And then it would all be, inverted commas, fixed. And that is not the case. And EHCPs are not without their problems. We have a desperately underfunded system. It's heavily under-resourced. Specialist placements are nowhere near as numerous as we need them to be. There's a huge amount of underfunding and, lack of understanding of all of that stuff. It's not a perfect system, but it's what we've got. And I have conversations with parents all the time who say, I just don't know if it's going to be worth it. And I understand that at the beginning of my process, when we were fighting for an EHCP, I was refused an EASE assessment. I was refused an EHCP. When the EHCP was issued, it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. I went to tribunal 3 times. That's probably why I know as much as I know, because I needed to. But what I do say to those parents is, look, you have a choice. You don't have to have an EHCP. But if you know that your child needs support, it's the surest way you've got of at least getting some of that in place. And being told that you won't get one, I was told Theo wouldn't get an EHCP. I was told by my Senko that if I got him an EHCP, I should have her job. I'm that petty that on the day I got the EHCP, I sent her a copy of my CV and a copy of the EHCP.
Heidi, I love you.
Because I am just all about the pushing back now. I don't even care. But when people say to me, is it worth it? I say, look at where we're at now. I had a child who was so unwell he couldn't get out of bed. And last week he got offered a place at university. And the only reason that was possible was because I got an EHCP for him.
What a journey.
So is it hard? Yes. Will it leave you exhausted? Yes. Will it bring you to your knees? Absolutely. Is it fair that we have to work so hard to get what is a legal right and a human right to be able to access just commonly available resources that our children should have access to? No, it's not fair, but it's what we've got. So I'm really passionate about empowering parents to become that parent who does not take no for an answer, and you've got to do quite a lot of work on becoming that parent. You've got to be the person who is willing to say, no, that's not going to work for us. What else have you got? Yes. You've got to be the person who says, I don't care that you don't think I'll get an EHCP. I'm actually going to ask for one anyway. I'm not going to wait for you to apply. I'm going to apply myself. Yeah. But there is freedom in that. And more than that, for me, yes, he's just got a place at uni. And for him, that's his measure of success. It was important to him that that's what he wanted. If he'd wanted to work in a popcorn factory, that's how we would have measured his success.
Yeah.
But more than that, I know that by him seeing me do the work required to advocate for him, he now has skills in self-advocacy. He understands what he's entitled to. He knows probably the Senko of practice better than I do. Wow. He is able to sit in a room full of other young people and say, that's not okay, that's against the Equality Act. You should say something. Wow. And because of that, he will be a cycle breaker. And that's what I am really passionate about.
You've raised a great child. Guys, I want to move on. I feel like we could talk forever, but I've still got loads of questions to get through. And one thing I cannot not put into this podcast is the area of self-care. I don't even know, I can't see it even on my script here, but I know, I just feeling like we really need to I need one thing that each of you do that helps you with your self-care. I know for me, I've talked about this a lot publicly, but I remind myself to climb out of the skin of my child. I think I have so much empathy, and we do often as parents, and because we're trying to advocate for them, we try and imagine what is this like for them. And it's kind of like we've just climbed into them. what can happen in those experiences, that we can also find ourselves depressed. We can find ourselves feeling their feelings because of our empathy. And for me, my hot one would be just climb out each day, look at yourself in the mirror and say, hello, you're whatever your name is. I'll go, hello, you're Carrie. You're not depressed. You are not struggling with school. You are a grown-ass adult, excuse the language. And you have your own agency. You are still Carrie. Aside from your child, you're still a human, your own human, as it were. So I would love to hear, let's go to Caro first, just anything that helps you to survive it, I suppose.
One thing that's really imperative to me is, and it doesn't work for everybody, I have to really train hard. So I would say I'm lifting weights twice a week. I'm on a bike once to twice a week. I work my body until it hurts. And then I feel it. And I know we are really annoying people like me that do this. And I never put out there, everyone should do this, work your body, get a six pack because everything will be fine. It won't be fine. It works for me. It just works for me. And I haven't come across anything in all of my years that works as well for me as that. And I have to have really, really loud music that makes me happy and sends me off. So the vast majority of my life, I am often a little daydream. Terrifyingly so. I wouldn't even begin to put this out there, what's in my head a lot of the time, because I think everyone that knows me would just be like, okay, we never knew you at all.
I think you're just admitting what we all do.
Yeah.
Honestly, I have an alternate life in here. So
the daydream always ends, and then they all die.
There's usually a bit of gore in there as well.
Catastrophic David there.
We like catastrophe. We're good at that. We're good at dealing with stress and horror. But for me, it works very, very well. I usually, if I can't work out, I would. I have a playlist that's specific to raise my mood and make me feel a bit more balanced. So I have lots of 80s tunes that help me. 90s.
I'm hearing the Eye of the Tiger as you're working out.
Well, actually, it's I've got the take on me is always there. But I love music. I love tunes. I like to sing loud in the car. There are a few things on my tick list that I will just have to do, but all of them basically for me come back to exercise. And I like my own space. And what we all went on a little bit of a self-discovery, didn't we, over lockdown? And turns out I'm a little bit of a dormouse. And I really, really like being on my own. And it's extraordinary because people growing up with me, I'm from Leicester originally, and we used to go on whenever we used to save up all year and then go to Mallorca, the joy of Magaluf. And I used to dance really, really like mad music till 7 a.m. at BCM, and it was brilliant. And people, if I say to them, God, I really don't want to come to that party, or I don't want to, they'd be like, what are you on, Tasker? Because I saw you in BCM age 19 wearing next to nothing, in a cage. But it's like that, but I don't want to talk to people doing that. I can't hear people. I don't want a conversation with anyone. So my point being is what comes across as a real extrovert, usually you'll find people are actually quite introverted. So for me, the go-to would be sweating, like working out, my own space, and, headphones with some loud music on. And it is a reminder, actually, Carrie, of who you are, of being a human being without being a parent, which resonates parents and carers across every neurodivergent, neurotypical, whatever. That's really important for us all. But because us neurodivergent parents and carers, we do have a next level. It is different. It's not the same. I would say we probably need to remind ourselves a little bit more often.
Lovely. Thank you, Caro. Heidi, let's go to you next.
Yeah. I'm not a worker outer.
Neither
I'm a napper.
neither is David.
But you know what? When you were speaking about it, I was thinking that's sensory regulation. That's what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
You're finding ways to regulate your sensory system. Mine would be kind of linked to that. And mine would be getting really serious and intentional about understanding what your triggers are, so that you know what things trigger your nervous system and throw you into dysregulation. Then you can make really clear decisions about whether you're going to mitigate those triggers, and if you can't mitigate them, how you're going to self-soothe. Wow. Because keeping yourself out of what I call brain on fire state is the secret to well-being. Wow. And as a parent who was not very good at that for a long time, and I've been in burnout recovery for 4 years. I have a chronic health condition now as a direct result of the incredible pressure my central nervous system was under, because I didn't know what I know now about sensory regulation. So yeah, work out what your triggers are. And on the flip side of that, work out what your glimmers are, which is some of what Caro's speaking about, and find a way to not get balance, because there's no such thing, but to be intentional about mitigating those triggers or soothing those responses, and make that your priority. That's what self-care is for me. It's not spa days. It's not bubble baths. Crikey, if I can pee with the door shut, it's a miracle. So, it's about finding places to get some brain rest. To pee, yeah, for sure. But, having some brain rest, whatever that looks like for you, and it might not be, home. It might not be that at all. It's about knowing.
I can't yoga. Who can sit there like that?
Yeah. I don't know an ADHD person in the world who can meditate. Not the way that it's traditionally
I fall asleep.
Yeah. Right, David. Let's get on to you, David. What I wanted you to share with us as well, because we haven't covered this, is just the power of sharing and the group that we started. So in terms of self-care, what difference has that made?
Okay, in terms of self-care, that group has made a world of difference. So much of, what you've both referenced is about remembering that in a world where you are so functional out of necessity that you're not human doings, you're actually human beings, and reminding yourself of that. And it's so much so, Cara, I'm going to get you a T-shirt with "Get Hench or Die Trying" on it and send it off to you. We have a group. We have a group at home that's been running for, I think, 11 years now, something like that, 10, 11 years. And it was initiated with Carrie, 2 other parents, and someone from our local social services, actually.
Autism services.
Autism services, sorry. And they got Carrie and 2 other ASD parents together, and we offered our house for a meeting because we had the space. It's for mums and dads, even though, interestingly, it's still mostly mums that come. And what it did is basically give people a space. Well, what it has become is a space where they can look around a room and say, here are fellow travelers. Because so many of us, when we first get a diagnosis, think it's us. It's just us. And we're made to feel like it's just us. Like we're the problem, we're the demanding ones, we're the issue, we're the warrior parents, we're the ones who are asking for things that are totally unreasonable because nobody else needs them. Then you get a whole group of people together and you look around the room and there are 20, 30, 40, 50 of you and you're going, wow, we are all in this together. We're all fighting the same battle. We stand a better chance of winning together. We're all navigating the same storms. We stand a better chance of getting through them together. And it really is self-care because it's a place where both parents and children, I'll get onto the kids in a minute, where both parents and children can recognize that they're not alone. Now, what happened was as the parents started coming, children started coming too. Their kids would come with them because many of them, don't have the luxury of being able to say, well, I'll leave you at home or take you to grandparents or friends or whatever. And the kids they started what we call a kitchen club. They basically just sit in the kitchen and parallel play and realize that, here's a place that I don't have to play your game. I can play my game sitting alongside you as you play your game. And we're friends. You're not demanding that I replicate you, duplicate you, or be something that you are in order to facilitate our connection. I could just be me and be connected with all these other kids being me. That's become an integral and a huge part of this. In fact, there are so many parents who come and say, I'm tired, I wasn't going to come today. And they said, you've got to go, about their child. And, and so in a way, what's happened is that it feels like we've created or been part of the creation of a place where us together with other parents can care for one another. And, as a result of that, we've had legal advisors coming, we've had Senkos and head teachers visiting. Well, at the last election, we had the prospective parliamentary candidates of our borough coming and telling people why they should vote for them, what they were going to do, how they felt about neurodivergence, how they were going to start trying to address some of the problems and the issues and the challenges that parents faced. And it's all happened because of a whole bunch of people getting together and saying, I'm going to go to a place where I'm not blamed. I'm going to go to a place where if I say the services aren't on my side, other people will say, we've had exactly the same thing and this is what we did. I'm unable to get help. This is what we did. The system's letting me down. It's letting all of us down. Let us collectively do this and see if we can get some change, initiate some change, and where you can admit to a sense of failure and inadequacy that we all feel at different times. And everybody else in the room is going to raise their hand and say, yes, we've been there, rather than, really? What's wrong with you then?
Yeah.
And that's so important. It's essential.
Being able to see yourself. And that's really what you're saying about those children as well, because often the children in that group are all in not all, but some of them are in mainstream school. And it might be the first time they've ever even met another autistic child.
Absolutely.
I do also want to say, David, that because you said about mums and dads, we have lots of non-binary people as well that are in that group, and a lot of our children now. It started out as a support group for parents of autistic girls. That's become trans, non-binary. It's become all of everything.
Absolutely.
As we have developed in our own family, we've gone like, hang on a minute, we need to switch this up. And that's one of the things I've loved. That group is just such a lovely community.
And it is
I would
now
just
inclusive.
encourage, and it started literally with we probably had 10 people for the first 2 years, and then it suddenly exploded, I think because people were getting more diagnoses. So I think anywhere where you are, just even if you go for coffee or go for a walk with two friends, it really makes a difference, just having that affinity with other parents who are going through the same stuff. Right.
There's so much power in community. And also, I just wanted to say, to add to that it doesn't have to be an in real life community. A lot of my parents who, we have a Facebook community of 10,000 families.
Yeah.
And the majority of them are not able to go and have coffee with friends because their kids can't leave the house, or their children are too unwell, or they have additional needs. So finding online spaces, your own little safe corner of the internet, has so much power.
Yeah, we started an online group once a month during lockdown, and then we just kept it for exactly that reason. Absolutely. Okay, let's go. We've got like 4 minutes or something before the next podcast starts. Okay, so let's quickly look at if we're dreaming for the future, what would you love to see? Just in a couple of sentences, what would you love to see, Caro?
Acceptance, just social acceptance, society acceptance in over all of it. So my children are better than my generation. They just are accepting differences, and that's the way it is. It's not, they don't see anything really as wrong. They will only see what's available to them and what's out there. If people, it's a very interesting thing. So if your children, you're watching this or listening to this, if your children come home and say, someone at school, I'm not having them, they're a bit weird, what they're essentially saying is they're not like me. And if you, in your group, in your family, or the people that you hang out with are just like you and only like you, then that really isn't raising your children with an open mind at all. It's a very narrow-minded way to see the world. And I think what we need to do is make sure that our children are porous, make sure that our children and that we recognize in ourselves oh, actually, I need to check myself. If you're being checked by your children, don't dismiss that. Don't go, oh, you're so woke. I am woke. That's fine. I'm happy and joyously woke, and I'm really comfortable with that. If you're not, you will eventually be abandoned on your own little island, because the way of the world and the way it's going is we all need to wake up. If I could change anything, I would just wake a few more people up with my wokeness and with my children's wokeness.
That. I'm like, ditto. Heidi, where are you at with this?
My God, yes, absolutely, Caro, 100%. I think what I would like to see is the celebration and the honouring of other lived experiences. So kind of building on that, you know, like if you're in a place where there are conversations happening about marginalised groups and there isn't someone from that marginalised group leading the conversation, don't have that conversation. There is so much value in experts by experience, and there is so much value in having people tell you about what their life is like, not just because so that you can go, oh, I'm so glad my life isn't like yours, or, oh, isn't that unusual? Like, diversity brings so much value to every single conversation and experience and moment. And like Cara says, if you're not having those moments when your worldview is challenged, you're not really living. So I would like to see a lot more of that.
Wow. David, we just had two giants speaking there.
I know. And I feel like here come the pictures.
David's going to say popcorn for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to see asset-led leadership in schools, in organizations, in communities, not an expectation that we would be cookie cutter models of one another, but that our differences would be embraced. I'd like to see a recognition that unity is not forged through uniformity, but through people who are different to one another, having unified objectives and finding different routes to get there. I'd like to see the word normal eradicated from the vocabulary.
Amen.
Because your normal is not mine. My normal is not yours. And I think that when people say normal, they most usually mean ordinary. Be ordinary. Be predictable. Be someone that I recognize as being able to tell what you'll do next, what you'll think next, how you'll act next. That's what they mean by normal. Be me. And I want to see that removed from the dictionary. I want to see more organizations like Our Thailand experienced at Hollyoaks. Our Thailand went in there as the first autistic actor of color to be in a serial drama. When Thailand came out as non-binary, they put behind the toilet doors of every toilet that they put pronoun signs so that people would understand. Their phraseology was, it's not that difficult if you care. And it's not that difficult if you care. You know, I want to see us begin to recognize that people who aren't like us are people. That people who are different from us have something to teach us, have something to show us, and actually be open to them. That because we speak Spanish and somebody only speaks French, we need a translator. We don't need to close our ears and say, I'm only going to speak to people who speak the same language as me.
Wow. This episode, I think it might be my best episode ever. Thank you guys so much for all that you've given. You've given so generously of yourselves today. Thank you to Caro Tasker, to Heidi Mavir, and to David Grant. I have loved it. I hope you have too, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. If you'd like to know more about the podcast, would be interested in applying for a job as an Auticon consultant, or would like further information about how Auticon can help support your business to be more neuroinclusive, please visit auticon.com/UK. This episode was recorded in February 2024. Recording and production was by Strathmore Studios in Clerkenwell, London. It was engineered by Alex Brown, edited by Billy Godfrey, and the music was by The Lethargies. That's all from us this time. Thanks again for listening, and bye for now.